Hey everyone, I'm Mike Del Preti, and you're listening to Context, the podcast where I'm talking to industry leaders about what's changing in the world of real estate. So today I'm joined by Chris Kelly, Executive Vice President over at HomeServices of America. Hey Chris.
Mike, thanks for having me.
Appreciate you coming all the way to Boulder on a beautiful sunny day.
It's amazing.
In February.
Yeah, amazing outside.
That's great. So can you give us kind of just a few sentence overview of, well, probably more than a few sentences, who you are, what you do?
Yeah, so part of HomeServices of America, as you noted, and joined HomeServices in 2007. Originally come from the legal side. I refer to myself as a recovering lawyer at this point, but that was kind of my background, was in private practice, and then joined our affiliate in Kansas City, Reese Nichols Real Estate, in 2000. It was early 2007, right before the Great Recession. So everyone was just like riding the high, even though you look back now and there was all these red flags of things that were going on, but no one had wanted to pay attention to those yet. And then about 6 months later, it was like the sky was falling. That was my introduction into real estate.
Great.
Yeah,
Great.
Exactly. Like, we made a great decision here. And then over time, just kind of migrated a little bit more over to the business side of Reese Nichols as we were kind of coming through those changes brought on by the Great Recession and the housing crisis. Took a few roles with HomeServices for a while. And then we acquired the Ebby Halliday companies in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in 2018 and had the pleasure of going down there and serving as their CEO for about 5 years. And then most recently now with HomeServices in my current role. And now really my job is just to help all of our different companies. We have about 52 brands across the country, helping them grow faster, best practices, find bright spots, implement those across the board for everybody.
And by helping out, I mean, you're a humble guy, but it sounds like they all kind of roll up into you, and that's your responsibility.
Yeah, I'm lucky also to have our CEO, Gino Blafari, who I know you've met, and he is a powerhouse and a ball of energy. And so it's great to have working for him and kind of helping, cement that vision that he has for everybody.
Yeah. Okay, great. Maybe give us a couple quick numbers. Out of all those organizations, rough idea, like just how many agents, how many transactions or transaction volume? I won't hold you to it.
We just finished up the year, so we're about 42,000 agents across the country. Those would be 42,000 that are part of HomeServices company-owned outlets, about another 30 to 40,000 when you factor in the franchisees. And, we kind of have a really weird family tree of home services between franchise and company owned and all these different brands. We did about 240-ish thousand transactions last year for about 160 billion. And that's on the brokerage side. And then we also have for 20 years operated a mortgage company, title, and insurance as well too.
Right. Oh, I heard that's the way to do it, right? Start a mortgage company and then you can make money.
It's so easy. I don't know why everyone doesn't do it.
What a great idea.
And it's funny about that because when I've done the joint venture with Wells Fargo, we've been a Wells Fargo correspondent, and then now we're wholly owned with Prosperity Home Mortgage. And that's, I would laugh a little bit, and you kind of were joking too, like when I would hear companies say, well, how are they going to get to profitability? Well, they're going to start a mortgage company. And we've done it every wrong way until we found the right way to do it.
Yeah.
It is not an easy business to break into and to do it in a profitable, compliant way.
What does everybody get wrong?
Well, I think a lot of people go down the JV path first, right? And the problem with the JV path is it does eliminate a little bit of the risk. Like, some of the downside, you're offloading that onto somebody else, but you're also losing the upside that comes with it in really good mortgage markets. I think the other thing that is a trouble with JV sometimes is the connection with the agent, right? Really trying to say this is a singular real estate experience, one team. It's just a great person down the hall that I can ask questions to, and they're there. And again, it's a bad model, but it's hard to really hit those milestone capture rates that everybody's after when you're not really the master of that domain a little bit on that business line.
But some of the biggest companies like Zillow, Open Door, Compass, they're saying, yeah, we're going to launch these mortgage operations and we're going to get in there. And it's just not working out. Like Open Door closed their whole mortgage op and now they're kind of loosely partnering with somebody. Zillow Home Loans up in the air. Is that successful?
Yeah, I think part of it is that you have to swim pretty far upstream to capture that buyer. Oftentimes, the consumer talks to a mortgage officer before they talk to an agent. They're dreaming online and playing around online for a while, and then they go, well, really, what can I afford? And oftentimes they will talk to a loan officer before they've talked to an agent. And so I think the problem with some of the portals in attempting to have, let's say a really big mortgage presence is by the time they get there, they're already attached to somebody else.
And it's hard to switch.
It's hard to switch.
Really hard to
switch. Yeah, and the agents, I think, oftentimes are like, I don't want to upset that apple cart. I've got a client, I'm working with this client, everything's going good. I don't want to recommend something different because that somehow might be disruptive to what they're doing.
Yeah. Fair warning. I gave you a heads up on this, but I want to ask you about incumbency.
Yeah.
In a lot of my research, I'm looking at models, new models, old models, and I have, these companies, whether they're called incumbents or legacy brands. And then there's the newer disruptors. And I'm not talking about, crazy disruptive models, but companies typically like the lower fee models, the ones that are growing a lot. And when you look at those, Berkshire Hathaway Home Services of America, it's a mouthful, it comes up as kind of the poster child of an incumbent.
Right.
While these other companies are growing, whether it's agent count, transaction volume, whatever metric or vanity metric, Berkshire Hathaway is kind of slow and steady, chugging along there. So tell me why I'm wrong.
Yeah, and I guess I don't know that that's a negative, right? So so part of the premise of it, is that a bad thing? Just being part of Berkshire Hathaway and kind of the culture of our company is we are likely not going to be the company that's going to be the first to do something. And kind of like Apple, right? Like Apple wasn't the first to bring out a digital watch and the phone and everything else like that, but can we be the best at it once we've proven that there's a demand there? And so an example of that would be a handful of years ago when the iBuyer craze started, right? Like everybody rushed into it saying, we're going to be an iBuyer. Our attitude was a little bit like, can you be profitable at this? Like, can you build in the profit on the purchase of the home? Because on a flip, you typically are either appreciating the value of the property through some type of rehabilitation, or you own it for a certain amount of time and it builds appreciation. That's how you make your money on the flip. Here, since that time frame is so compressed, we look at it and like, well, you have to make the profit on the purchase. And how many consumers out there are willing to sacrifice equity in their home? There's not a lot. There's a few, but there's not a lot. And so that's just an example of a lot of different things where we pause a little bit longer maybe than some others before we take action on something. And what we saw play out was, okay, it really didn't work for most of the players in that space. And a lot of them, chased it out of FOMO and then said, well, okay, this model doesn't work. And we're left with just a few players that are, still trying to figure it out. And, to their credit, their financials have improved in trying to work through that model. But for us, it's a little bit of like trying to avoid the trap, and we're all guilty of this, of trying to be a brokerage for everybody, right? We can be low fee, we can be high service, we can be luxury, we can be all these different things. And if you try to be everything for everyone, you're really nothing to nobody. And I think a lot of us have fallen into that trap in the past, and we're trying to be mindful of that, of not to pretzel ourselves into this contorted position where we want to attract every agent. We want to attract a very certain type of agent, and that's where we're at. And if that means like, there's some other companies that have more agents because they're drawn to there for their fee structure, whatever it is, you have to be okay with that. Otherwise, I think you find yourself in that trap of being like I think we used examples of like Sears and JCPenney or Kmart. These companies, we're not the best, we're not the cheapest, we're somewhere in the middle, and all of a sudden you're just not there.
If you look across the brokerage space, there's some other brokerages that are growing market share, agent count exponentially year over year, and does that keep you up at night?
Well, I mean, certainly you want to identify, is the entire agent mindset changing? Are they all after, like, where is the cheapest place for me to hold my license? I think the answer to that is no. I think there's a lot of folks that are, and that's the most primary thing that's driving them. That's not going to be our model, and we have to be okay with that. Because what I see happening there is it's a migration from company to as the next model comes out, we're a little bit cheaper. Then the next, we're a little bit cheaper. And you've seen it. You've seen where those agents have migrated towards. And that's great. I mean, if that's really what your value proposition is, you should lean into that. And if you're an agent, that's the most important thing to you. Great. That's where you should be. I have not seen enough to fear like the type of agent that typically would affiliate with one of our brands, that's the driving force of why they're with us, is purely just dollars and cents. It's a factor for sure. Like, you're kidding yourself if, the commission arrangements you have with your agents isn't important. But for a lot of them, it is that and a lot of other things that, would keep them sticky to your brands.
Sure. Okay. No, that's great. That makes sense. And what do you think about homes.com?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to talk about a player that has the resources to go toe to toe with Zillow, they have it. And I've heard Andy Florence speak now multiple times at different conferences, and he's pretty bold with his actions and what he wants to do and how he feels about some of the competitors he's trying to displace or get in there with. I think a lot of folks had, for years and years, okay, Zillow's coming in to take over the world. They want to be a brokerage and have agents. And, it proved out to be that they kind of want to do everything but that. Like if the real estate is a pie, they want to do all other parts of the pie, except the part where you have agents and have to deal with that, because that's a thin margin business and it's difficult and you're competing with a lot of others for the same resources. So I don't think homes.com is looking to come in and do that. I think what they've seen is some trends out there to where there is money to be made on the list side of transactions. The payment for enhanced listings. With the leads have kind of been where everyone's gone before. And I was talking with some others about the fact that I think in 1 year, 100 million leads were sold and there's only 5 million homes that are purchased. And I think Homes.com has seen there's a flip side to that. There's a revenue model, subscription model potentially where, we can attract a lot of eyeballs to our website. They have the money to drive that. I think they're going to have probably a pretty big presence at the Super Bowl. And if we drive eyeballs here, real estate agents, brokerages would be willing to pay to have their listings in an enhanced treatment. And it's a smart move.
Are you a fan of the model?
I'm a fan of subscriptions. Like I've read a lot of books on subscription models. A lot of us have it in one way or another within our fee structure because part of the issue with real estate is, how dependent it is on a singular real estate transaction to happen. If you have that reoccurring revenue model, you're not dependent on a transaction. In fact, it's really why we are so into our insurance business as a growing business segment, because it's the only business segment we have that does not need a real estate transaction to make money. On the insurance side, you don't really make profit off the sale of insurance. It's all in the renewals. You treat your customers right, they renew their insurance with you, and that's where the revenue is. So that's kind of our version of that, of this reoccurring revenue model, non-dependent on a real estate transaction.
Yeah.
And so I admire what they're doing. There's very few other people that could come into this place just because of the resources that would be needed in order to fight, kind of the eyeballs that Zillow is trying to attract.
So if I heard correctly, if I think about the org chart underneath you, there's say 40, 50,000 agents, and I would guess 99.9% of them are members of NAR.
Yeah.
Right? What do you
out of necessity, maybe they don't want to be, but current way that it's structured, certainly, yeah.
What do you think NAR needs to start, stop, and continue doing?
Yeah, I think on a start side, I think they are a fantastic organization when it comes to, and lobbying sometimes gets kind of a negative connotation, but I would say advocating with members of Congress and other regulators on how decisions, laws, regulations could harm or help property rights and home ownership. I think they do a great job with that. In fact, it's the part that very few people see. I had the privilege of being part of NAR as a liaison for a year, and I didn't have appreciation of that until I got to see that. And they do amazing work with that. I think where there's an opportunity for improvement and some things they can stop is because it's such a large organization. I think they want to be inclusive, and they have all the, I don't even know how many committees there are. I think there's an opportunity to streamline the things that they're focused on and work towards more really like how do we improve the industry's performance with consumers, and how do we continue to make sure that the United States is a very favorable place for home ownership, because it is the single largest driver of wealth for Americans is owning a home. That's what they should be focused on. Some of the other nonsense stuff that, can happen, I think is an opportunity we have right now to maybe put that to bed.
Okay. So NAR provides value, should keep doing some stuff, but there's a lot. There's a lot on the plate there, and maybe focus is the important.
And I think there's folks within there right now that feel the same way.
Yeah.
Again, there's been a lot of negative attention there over the last year just because of some of these external news stories. And so I don't think I don't think what I'm advocating for here is different from what I think some others within are feeling the same way. There's an opportunity to renew the focus and really the mission that we're here to do, and get away from some of the other stuff. And when I say the other stuff, it's just there's a lot of events. I think this could probably thinned out a little bit and stuff. I think people will be more than happy to still continue to support the organization, even if there isn't a party every 6 months for the next person who got installed as some officer.
Sure. Shifting gears a little bit, I'm a big fan of transparency. In a lot of my work, transparency comes through. You're a leader in this space. Can you give me an example of a way that you lead with transparency?
Yeah, I think that's probably my most important role is communication, and you really can't be an effective communicator if you're not being transparent. With the news of the day, all the class action cases and the litigation that's been going on, we have really tried to lean in with all of our company leaders through lots of communication, lots of meetings with them, being completely transparent on what's occurring, what it means, what it doesn't mean, trying to separate out the noise from some of the media sources versus what's real, what's reality. It's critically important. I just think that if you want the people that are entrusting kind of their livelihoods to you, if you're not being transparent or regularly communicating with them, one, they may not sure how to act or respond to questions they're getting, but two, it becomes really hard to say we have a clear vision and this is the direction that we're going if you're not operating in that manner. One of my very first mentors was Jerry Reese, and he used to always say, when in doubt, tell the truth. And it really is pretty good. It's basic but good advice. Like when you're in doubt, just tell the truth.
Yeah.
And people will understand that. And they'll typically rally behind that and understand we're going to go through some challenging times, but you were honest about it. So now we know what we need to do.
Sure. What about technology? Is there any sort of technology you're using in your organization that you love, or the people that report to you love, or your agents love right now?
It's technology is like, it's like recognition, right? You have a love-hate. It's just hard to do it right.
Yeah.
And it's always changing. I use an example of like HomeServices, with iBuying being an example of a company where we slow played that to our benefit. Technology would be the inverse of that, where we could admit that at one point we kind of chase that rabbit to say, yeah, we're a technology company, and attempted to kind of dip our toes in that water. And 6 or 7 years ago, there was a group of us, we were meeting with Zillow when people still were in the office, and we were out in Seattle.
Yeah.
And we walked through like their 11 floors of their Seattle office, like all these engineers and softwares. And we walked out, and I turned to Dana Strandmo, who's another one of our executives of HomeServices, and said, we are not a technology company. We're a real estate company, and we should not be ashamed of that. We should fully embrace that and find technology partners that want to work with us, want to provide what we need. They have expertise that we don't have. And that was a good lesson for us because we dabbled in it and we tried it. And it's one thing to build something. What I've always found trouble with is like, okay, you build it, but who's going to iterate on it? Who's going to continue? Every tool we use, every app we use, like when you get annoyed, like, oh, my apps are always updating. Well, it's because there's designers and engineers on the back end that are noticing the way that we're behaving when we use it. And they're like, oh, we should move this button here and this color should be this way. And if you don't have the ability to iterate something constantly, like you shouldn't be trying to build it in the first place.
I love updating my apps. If there was an app where I could just watch a progress bar slowly fill up, I would download that.
Yeah.
It gives me a lot of happiness.
Yeah, and so I think on the technology front, I think the other realization that I came to, and I think a lot of others did too, especially as it relates to agents and consumers, is if you cannot honestly use the word simple when describing it, you are probably going to fail in the adoption of that technology. They are looking for simplicity. And no matter how complicated it may be on the backside, like you could have the best CRM, whatever it may be, if it is complicated and it feels like trying to turn an elephant on a dime, you're not going to get wide adoption of it. So it's simplicity, connecting the things. I think some of the things that people have done that have really, I think, driven the industry forward on technology is the tying of things together. So I don't have to remember 7 different vendor names anymore. Everything's in one place. That's the stuff that you get adoption with.
Do you think agents actually want technology?
I think they want technology, again, back that it's simple and it works and it does not require me to go to 4 hours of training every week to understand how to use it. That's what they want.
Okay. So there's a lot of technology out there that does a lot of different things. There's CRMs, there's AI chatbots, there's document signing. Can you give me one example of one piece of technology that was either really good or really bad for you?
I think on the really good front, and again, this is pretty simplistic, but when we started putting all of these tools into a singular spot, that's when we saw agents starting to use them with more frequency. And, you could call it white labeling, or you could just say, look, we call this something that we weren't going to ask you to remember the 7 different vendor names. Those are the things where we really could actually see measurable improvement on the use of technology. And so it's interesting, the most basic tool that we've seen probably the most use of is anything that has to do with email, right? So like email newsletters, right? So creating very easy templates where you can drop your listings into it automatically. You can have templates ready to go to blast out a, just listed, just sold, or a newsletter with community news. Agents love those and they use them quite a bit. It sounds really simple because we're saying email, but that is one where they really gravitate towards. Seems very simple, and it's a great one to use. And again, when we come back to CRMs, it feels like every couple of years we go through another iteration of like, okay, is this one better? Is it the same? If it's not simple, you're probably not going to get widespread adoption on it.
Awesome. Love it. All right. If you could send a 1-sentence message back in time to 2019, Chris, as it relates to your professional life, 1-sentence message back 4 years, what would you say to yourself?
It's still kind of fresh when you think back to 2019 a little bit. I think what I would have said is...
Buy hand sanitizer?
Yeah, buy hand sanitizer. Yeah, exactly. Buy GameStop. I think I probably would have said, be ready to... If I wasn't trying to do the Biff Tanner, go back to the future and predict the future or something like that, be ready to be surprised. Because there were different points where hey, this is it. Like, this is it for all of us as far as, and I don't even mean the pandemic. I mean for like real estate, right? Because there was like a 2-month window where like, this is,
you can get more specific than that. What would you tell yourself that's actionable that you could actually?
Oh, so if you are going to do that, like this is the actionable intelligence that you could give somebody on it. I think what you'd have to tell them to do is, I feel like what happened during the pandemic was buyers were really, really slow to respond to how much power the sellers had during that market. And then when it flipped, sellers were really slow to respond to buyers now being in a different position. And so I think I would have told myself, prepare your people to be busier than they've ever been. Okay. Because that's what I heard. I mean, that, everyone was like, I've never been more busy. And that is real estate in a nutshell, right? And I have some family back in Kansas that are farmers, and it's kind of the same thing. Like, the rainfall's never right. It's either too much and we're flooding the crops, or it's a drought. And real estate's you don't ever really hear an agent say, I have the perfect number of clients right now.
Yeah.
Like, it's perfect.
Yeah.
It's either like, I've got nothing, or like, I'm so crazy I can't keep my head on straight. And that was a lot of it during the first unicorn years of the pandemic, was I can't keep up. There's so much going on. Everything was just flying by us, and we're trying to do real estate in kind of a new and different way as well. And then Fed gets involved, rates start going up, and then it was like, I've got nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. It's typically feast or famine quite a bit.
I asked Robert Refkin from Compass the same question, and I loved his answer. It was the longest compound sentence I've ever heard. But to his credit, he very simply simplified that, down into a key phrase. And I forget what it is right now, but kind of like you, be ready to be busier than ever.
Yeah. And help people through that. There was a lot of stress associated with that. And I understand, for real estate agents, a lot of different professions got thrown in under the phrase of frontline workers or whatever. But for real estate agents, yes, we did a lot of Zoom showings and, Facebook Live stuff or whatever. But really, for an agent, they still had to be out there.
Yeah. I remember I looked at a house during the pandemic, and it was like that scene from E.T.
Yeah. Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah. And to their credit, it is one of the things that I am always so impressed by with real estate professionals is even though I think as a profession, all of us, me included, we're not really big fans of change, but we actually respond to it pretty well, even though we kind of don't like it. Overnight, we had to kind of do so many things different in the way that we showed houses and prepped clients. And again, trying to manage the emotions of these buyers who were like, there's a line out the door. You better get ready.
A lot changed during the pandemic. Has anything stuck?
I think typically we always think as we go through some major shift that we'll never go back to the way that it was. I feel like there's not a lot of stuff to me that I would say is so dramatically different than it was before. Yeah. I think probably the use of video in real estate, whether that's in marketing or showing homes and stuff, that has probably at a higher percent now than it was before then. Mm-hmm. If there was really something that's probably changed as a result of COVID in real estate, it wouldn't really necessarily be consumer facing. I do think the way that in traditional brokerages that still provide office space, I think the way that offices are used has certainly changed, and that has stuck from COVID. If it would have been 2 weeks to flatten the curve, I think everyone goes back to using space the way they did before because of how long it went on. One of the things we have to look at is the type of space that we provide to our agents to collaborate, work together, but also make sure that it's not sitting empty 6 days a week either. So that is something that surely has stuck.
Okay.
I think from a consumer and agent's perspective, some technologies got advanced and things like that, but I think fundamentally the transaction feels pretty close to the same.
Sure. What's something you've learned in the past year?
I think what I've learned in the past year is that no matter how much you prepare, there is always a curveball or a meteor coming out. And I found myself like every year, like, 'cause we budget, right? So, we're Berkshire Hathaway, so we're pretty into budgeting and forecasting and things like that. And you try to always account for everything. And it feels like every year, or at least every other year, there is something that you could not have predicted, something that you did not know that would be coming, that derails your best laid plans. And so over the last year, certainly through, I think, a lot of these class action cases that are out there, is another reinforcement. I hate to say I had to learn it this year because I should have always known that, but there is always something out there that is a contingency ready to impact what your best plans are for the year going forward.
Yeah. Kind of going back to that adaptability that you're talking about.
Yeah.
At both boots on the ground at an agent level, but also at your level. You're budgeting out 12 months, but who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, we had, very much defined, we kind of operate under the 4 disciplines of execution model, and we have our WIGs, wildly important goals, every year. And those are kind of your North Star, and that's your map, and you stick with them. But then when something really major happens, you have to be able to stop and say, look, that was important yesterday, but today the landscape's different. And so that is now set aside, and we have to add something new here. That, I think, can rattle a lot of people. And if you're that way, you'll probably be frustrated in real estate. If you're comfortable in that environment and you can even maybe somewhat thrive in that environment, I think you'll find this to be a great industry to be a part of.
Can you think of an instance where you had to make a really tough call in business that went against the grain of conventional wisdom?
Yeah, I mean, I think our industry is a little bit of kind of hair on fire. Like anytime like a new model comes out, well, that's it. We're never going to sell a house again other than this new way. And everyone panics. And I remember being at when I was back in my legal days at a law firm, I think the law firm, it was a big law firm in Kansas City. I think I had 5 business cards in 7 years because, that name would come off the building and, no one looked up. You just kept working. I'm like, oh, I got a new business card with that name off now, or a new name added onto it and stuff. And then I got into real estate, and it took me a while to get used to this, of that. There is really, when something new comes, it's like, oh my gosh, like this is really hard. And there's a fear that if you have to make a change, everyone's going to leave you. And so certainly as we have gone through a shift in the market, a shift as a result of a lot of this litigation, we've had to make, difficult decisions as a business. What I have found is that, again, back to your question about transparency, if you're honest with your people, and that can include staff and agents, they'll understand why you have to do it. And so for us, it could be reducing the size of our business, whether it be square footage, it could be people. But if you don't do those things now, they only get harder over time. And it's not fun. But I think, again, if you're back to transparency and you're honest, you'll receive support even when you have to make those difficult decisions, especially when they impact people.
Yeah. Okay. Last question I got for you. Kind of biggest challenge or opportunity over the next 6 to 12 months? And you can't say lawsuits.
Oh, man. Well, okay. Well, what I was going to say is this. I won't say lawsuits. What I will say is that the response to the lawsuits, that essentially every major brokerage is wrapped up in these, whether, you were in the original ones or now you're just part of these copycat cases and stuff. One of the disappointing things about these is that the resources that would have gone into continuing to evolve, advance, invest in agent and consumer experiences, that is going to be significantly diminished over the next several years, because every brokerage involved with these is going to have to dedicate resources to resolving or fighting these cases. And those, you cannot duplicate the same dollar. No matter what they say publicly, resources that otherwise would have really pushed us ahead, would have allowed some companies to maybe merge or, create some really cool dynamic new things, that is going to stall out over the next several years while everyone has to tend to these. So not the cases themselves, but the impact of those cases is something that is really, we're going to see a shift in that within some of our brokerages. And then with a lot of the third-party technology companies, they're not directly impacted by that, only in the sense that how much resources do the brokerages have to pay or to partner with some of those technologies for a period of time as well. We'll get through it, but there will be an impact for a period of time.
Right. No, that's a really interesting point. I hadn't heard that before. So if you're a generic brokerage that just settled for $50 million, that's $50 million you can't spend on technology. You can't spend it on M&A activity. You can't spend it on anything.
Exactly. We're a thin margin business to begin with. A lot of people are surprised by that, but we really are. And so, whether it's 20 million, 30, 50, 80, those are real dollars. And you can't keep doing everything exactly the same when you've had to output that type of resource into resolving something that does not necessarily advance the industry forward.
Yeah, good point. Well, we'll close there. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining today. I'm Mike Del Prete. You're listening to Context. If you want to check out more podcasts or read some of my research, good starting point is my website, www.mikedp.com. And we'll catch you all next time. Thanks.